Hey everyone, Discordian Kitty here. Has World of Warcraft lost its edge? For the first time in years, Azeroth has been experiencing a time of unprecedented peace. I mean, yes, there have been a couple of conflicts with dragons and Nerubians and of course Xal'atath, but the Alliance and Horde have officially signed an armistice that has translated into a lasting peace between the factions. In a game literally named after a central theme of conflict between orcs and humans, doesn't this peace challenge the very essence of World of Warcraft itself? This is a discussion that's been growing since Shadowlands, and the recent main story from Legacy of Arathor has only contributed to these concerns further. After all, why would Danath Trollbane, veteran of the Second War, suddenly seem totally okay with orcs? And would the Worcs of Hammerfall, who were literally driven from their home by light-worshipping fanatics, be so trusting of someone like Faerin, an Arathi human who's about as light-aligned as they come? A lot of interesting questions are being raised lately, and I thought it would be a fun idea to go over some of them and try work out if it's true that World of Warcraft has been so thoroughly declawed, it's now World of Peacecraft, or World of Warcraft. Do you get it? Oh, how my sides hurt from laughter at such a clever name. I'm sure you'll join me in being just so impressed at the sick burn so brilliant only a comedic genius could have thought of it. Mild sarcasm aside, I do think there's a lot of legitimate criticism about some of the more peaceful storytelling. So let's begin by taking a look at one of the more controversial characters in Legacy of Arathor, Danath Trollbane. A veteran of the Second War, Danath is one of the sons of Lothar, a group of Alliance who travelled through the Dark Portal to Draenor after the Second War, not only because they saw the threat that the Orcs posed to Azeroth, but because they realised they threatened other worlds as well. When a magical accident started to tear Draenor apart, transforming it into the broken planet we now know as Outland, the sons of Lothar made the ultimate sacrifice by closing the Dark Portal behind them. Back on Azeroth, they were honoured as martyrs for their sacrifice, and Danath's statue stands alongside the other sons of Lothar, whose statues guard the entrance to Stormwind. Now stranded in Outland, Danath took up leadership over the sons of Lothar as Turalyon and Alleria had disappeared. They were off to fight in a 1,000-year war, but nobody knew that at the time. Danath settled in Honor Hold, an Alliance fortress in Hellfire Peninsula, and from there continued to fight against the demons and the orcs of Outland, especially coming into conflict with the fell orcs of Hellfire Citadel. Even after the Dark Portal reopened to Outland, Danath stayed where he was, recognizing the threat the fell orcs posed to Azeroth and resolving to continue fighting them. A Trollbane of Stromgarde, Danath's family has been the ancestral rulers of the city for centuries, and even in Outland spoke about hoping to go home one day to see the city return to its former glory.
Stromgarde will stand proud once more.
Danath did return to Azeroth during Legion to take part in the war against the Burning Legion. Since that war was mostly based in the Broken Isles, that's where Danath was based as well. Alliance players can still find him inside the Legion version of Dalaran's Alliance Inn, A Hero's Welcome. Sorry, long-term Horde player here. Their inn is called A Hero's Welcome? Seriously? Okay. Danath had finally returned to Stromgarde by Battle for Azeroth, where he led the Alliance forces against the Horde during the Battle for Stromgarde, which was canonically won by the Alliance. He remained King of Stromgarde, but he's also remained a stereotypical son of Lothar in that the man cannot seem to resist a war. We've seen this over and over again with Alleria as well. Even when these people have a home with loved ones asking them to stay, they just can't seem to resist the call of some glorious battle that's going to take them far away. So when the war with Xal'atath led to Jaina and Thrall calling people to Khazar-Gar, Danath came running. Literally, he was the first to respond to Jaina's call.
Jaina stifled a laugh. She couldn't help it, despite her foul mood. Danath was the first to respond to her call. He had been in the city for several days already, helping Jaina prepare for the summit.
By the sounds of it, Danath had already left Stromgarde by then, leaving behind his niece, Marin Trollbane, as a regent.
There is a considerable force amassed at Stromgarde, a ready-made army awaiting command. Thrall rubbed his chin. Interesting. Who commands this garrison? My niece, Marin, said Danath. As my diplomatic duties draw me to Stormwind, She stands as regent of Stromgarde.
During his absence, Marin was stoking tensions with the Horde, which had caused them to send the Korkron in as a response. Danath's response to this news was to pretty much shrug it off as unimportant compared to the war at hand. He volunteered the 7th Legion to join the forces against Xalatath, and even volunteered the Korkron as well, for good measure.
Danath raised his hands. Please, we have been through this. He sighed and began a slow circuit of the table. I understand your fears, but you forget. Stromgarde still struggles to recover from the Fourth War. Marin requested aid from the 7th Legion to help farmers fend off predators, to train new soldiers to support the Alliance, to maintain our family's rule while I am absent. I trust she is only doing what she feels she must as a leader, and that the matter will easily be righted. A fresh murmur spread around the table, but Danath would not be deterred. Here is our strike force, the 7th Legion, and, he nodded as he walked by Agra, the Korkron, 2 of the best fighting forces in Azeroth, trained, ready. We could not hope for a better army.
At the end of that story, Danath returned to Stromgarde himself, just long enough to remove Marin from her position and have her imprisoned for basically trying to start another war with the Horde, before he left almost immediately again to head back to Khazalgar. And by now, we are beginning to see something about Danath's personality. He is a very enthusiastic soldier. No one could accuse him of shying away from a fight. He spent decades trapped in Outland, and when the way home opened up again, he still stayed where he was because there was a war to be fought. When he finally returned home, he didn't return home. He went to the Broken Shore instead because that's where there was a war to be fought. He did eventually make it back home, just in time for when there was a war to be fought there as well. But then he didn't stay at home. His duties called him away to Stormwind. You have to wonder what duties require a king to leave his kingdom, and why they couldn't be handled by, say, an ambassador. Sometimes when someone keeps finding a reason to leave, it's because they don't want to stay. I feel like at this point, someone needs to take Stromgarde aside and break it to her gently. He's just not that into you. But we can also see how Danath's character is confusingly written, is maybe the gentlest way I can put it, even before we get into the new questline. Here we have a character that fought against the Old Horde in the Second War, long before social justice Warchief Thrall's new, less aggressive Horde. The Old Horde were fueled by bloodlust, worshipped demons, enslaved dragons, and even the ones who didn't were still ready to conquer without mercy. Peace and tolerance wasn't even an option. You fought or you died, sometimes both. Danath understood this so deeply, he gave up everything just to try stop these orcs from inflicting themselves on other worlds. Not because he cared deeply about these other worlds, he didn't know anything about them. Just because his experience with the orcs left him believing they were so dangerous, stopping them was more important than anything else. In Outland, Danath got to deal with fell orcs, which are like your typical bloodlust orcs, but dialed up to 11. Which is quite a feat because bloodlust orcs are already dialed up to 11. When Danath returned home to fight against the Legion, one of the first things he got to witness was a temporary peace between the Alliance and Horde, immediately followed by the Horde betrayal on the Broken Shore, which resulted in the death of Varian Rin, the human High King. Then Danath got to fight in the Third War against the Horde, which now included protecting his home, not only from orcs, but from undead as well. Nothing about this is screaming, and then one day he was suddenly very tolerant of the Horde. Danath started out intolerant of the Horde for pretty justifiable reasons, and his whole life has included experiences that would only reinforce that intolerance further. So why exactly is he okay with the orc presence in the Arathi Highlands? Why would he punish Marin for challenging it? Shouldn't it be something he's challenging himself? In my view, there are 3 explanations that make sense. The first is that Danath had some sort of off-screen epiphany that made him tolerant of the orcs and the Horde. While it's left us feeling surprised at an apparent change in personality, it's not impossible. The Alliance and Horde are experiencing a time of unprecedented peace. There was even a time skip between the events of Shadowlands and the events of Dragonflight, making Tyrellian's leadership the most peaceful the Alliance have known in living memory. During this time, a lot of the old tensions between the Alliance and Horde have relaxed. We know from Aleria's short story that Turalyon, Regent High King of the Alliance, can visit his son Arator in the Horde City of Silvermoon freely. A lot of important Alliance members and leaders were invited to Lothar and Thalysra's wedding. It's also possible Danath has fought monsters like fell orcs and the Burning Legion demons long enough to know the difference between a truly evil threat and people who are different but reasonable, which could explain why he's eager to fight Xalatath but not the Magar. The second explanation, that could supplement the first, is that Danath is, first and foremost, a soldier. We do see the evidence of this in his history. Danath always seems to choose duty first, over everything else. At present, there is an official peace between the Alliance and Horde. The human kings loyal to the Alliance are expected to uphold that peace. Danath is a loyal member of the Alliance. When he's called to war, he responds without question or hesitation. And when he's told to uphold a peace, he commits to that as well, without question, and punishes his regent when she does not. The final explanation, which I find a bit more fun, but also less likely, is that Danath is secretly against the peace with the Horde, but knows he can't openly defy the Alliance's wishes on this, and so he set up Marin as regent knowing she'd do the dirty work for him. He only put a stop to Marin's rule after it caused enough trouble that he could no longer pretend to ignore, and even then he made sure to deal with her in a way that left her with a significant amount of influence. Fun, as I said, but again, probably not. With all this in mind, let's look again at Danath's story in Legacy of Arathor. As Faerin approaches Stromgarde, she's amazed by the sight of Thoradin's wall. Danath basically tells her not to be.
Is that...
Thoradin's wall? Yes.
Then the stories and legends I read as a child were true.
Stories are just stories, Faerin. And that wall is just a wall.
I know Arathi history is embellished, Danath. But are you not proud of your heritage?
Yes, but pride in our legends foments stromic superiority and reasons to strike at our neighbors.
I understand. Among my people, some still distrust outsiders. I had thought your people...
Going to Kaz Olgar was unpopular in Stromgarde. But the Sons of Lothar promote tolerance and mercy.
Now, I will say I don't really care that Danath is dismissive about Faerin's awe. He clearly doesn't like Stromgarde because he seems to take any opportunity to leave. A distaste for Stromic superiority attitudes is as good an explanation as any. Supremacists are always exhausting, and just spending 5 minutes around one is enough to make anyone hate them. But to say the Sons of Lothar promoted tolerance and mercy? Like, no they didn't, Danath. I'm sorry, but I just don't think that's true. Again, the Sons of Lothar sacrificed themselves to try take down the Orcs because they saw them as such a threat not only to their own world, but to other worlds as well. One of Turalyon's epiphanies during the Second War was that even though the light is supposed to unite all life on Azeroth, the Orcs weren't from Azeroth, therefore it was okay to just see them as a threat that needed to be eradicated. I guess you could argue that Turalyon having that crisis in the first place points to a commitment to tolerance, because Turalyon needed to find a way around it, but even so, tolerance just isn't a word that leaps to mind when thinking about this particular group. In Chronicles, the Sons of Lothar are introduced like this. Turalyon raised his banner, declaring that he would lead this army, the Sons of Lothar, into the Orcish homeworld and end the Horde forever. Following your enemies into their homeworld to end them forever just isn't an action that screams promotion of tolerance or mercy to me. If you visit the Monument of Remembrance in Honor Hold, you can read this quote from Turalyon. In remembrance of the Supreme Allied Commander, Anduin Lothar, a man who would sacrifice everything in defense of his king, his people, his home. Let our enemies know our names. Let our allies honor our passing. We are the Sons of Lothar. Who knew that all this time, let our enemies know our names, was a line that's there because the Sons of Lothar want to make such a good, tolerant, and merciful impression on their enemies, they turn them into friends who learn their names. My point being that, yeah, this line is weird and a little nonsensical. The Sons of Lothar didn't promote tolerance and mercy. Claiming that now is a good example of a bit of clumsy rewriting of something that used to be pretty cool and declawing them in a way that's almost offensive by itself. The Sons of Lothar were fighting against demon blood-driven creatures who wanted to conquer worlds. They gave up everything to protect others from this evil. If you want to compare it to real-world politics, the paradox of tolerance is that you cannot be tolerant of intolerance. Now claiming they always promoted tolerance and mercy isn't some progressive move, it's just a bit of a weak and empty platitude that feels out of place because it is. All that said, I don't agree that the storyline is evidence that World of Warcraft has lost its teeth, or that everyone's all happy and hippie and lovely flowers now, not by a long shot. I don't agree that everything we see is out of the blue either. This was already hinted at with the short story, but the official peace between the Alliance and Horde hasn't actually translated to a perfect, peaceful, utopian society. What a shock, after decades of conflict that included a send-off involving some of the worst atrocities ever seen in Azeroth, which in a world like Azeroth is really saying something. Not everyone is happy to forgive and forget. All in all, the growing tensions in the Arathi Highlands isn't a surprise. While nobles and other important members of the Alliance have been busy disappearing to other realities and continents, the people of Stromgarde have been struggling with getting their basic needs met. The city was once the center of a human empire. Now, even their own king has decided he has more important duties in some other kingdom. It's not hard to see why nostalgia for a glorious past is so attractive. And with this nostalgia comes resentment. I've seen some complaints that the human supremacist attitudes in Stromgarde is something that doesn't fit the story, that they're just real-life politics that have been crowbarred in. I disagree, and not just because there's no such thing as human supremacists in real life. Like, I don't know how to tell you this, but there's no such thing as orcs, trolls, or elves in real life either. Historically, Stromgarde has always been a bit like this. After the Second War, Stromgarde had no interest in showing the orcs mercy. They wanted them to be executed. The question of what to do with the captured orcs became a subject of bitter debate. Gilneas and Stromgarde argued for the execution of the prisoners, yet Lordaeron was against putting the orcs to the blade. The capacity for mercy proved that the Alliance was more civilized and honorable than the Horde. Rather than execute the orcs, Lordaeron wanted to lock them in internment camps, prisons to be funded by Alliance members. In fact, this may be where Danath's ideas about mercy and tolerance come from. I think we've already established that Danath is not entirely at home in Stromgarde. Comparatively, Lordaeron and Stormwind have shown more tolerant and merciful attitudes, and this may be what Danath is emulating. Either way, the orcs were not executed and instead placed in internment camps. The largest of these camps was in the Arathi Highlands. The orcs held captive there would later be freed by Thrall, and it was this camp that would go on to become Hammerfall. So from the Stromgarde perspective, any conflict they've experienced at all with Hammerfall can be traced back to this decision made against Stromgarde's own wishes to show the orcs mercy. What's more, it was this very disagreement and its consequences that would drive Stromgarde to pull out of the Alliance, favoring self-reliant isolationism instead. The destruction of the internment camps proved to be the tipping point for many among the Alliance of Lordaeron. Lady Cortana Prestor made sure of it, speaking passionately to every person of noble birth she could reach. The orcs had all escaped. The money sent to imprison them had been wasted. What was the point of this faltering alliance? The High Elves of Quel'Thalas were the first to leave the alliance. The human nations of Gilneas and Stromgarde soon followed. They had always believed they were better off on their own, and the incompetence of Lordaeron only seemed to confirm it. It is likely that the Second War also contributed to modern bitter attitudes towards even the elves. Once, Quel'Thalas swore an oath of undying loyalty to the founder of the Empire of Arathor, Thoradin, in thanks to the humans' help during the Troll Wars. But by the time of the Second War, Quel'Thalas responded to the reminder of this oath by sending only a token force to join the war effort, and only took the Horde seriously when they were attacked themselves. Human bigotry against other races of Warcraft is not even remotely some new invention. Long before this patch, before Chronicles, before even World of Warcraft itself, the bigotry and racial arrogance shown by Garithos was a driving force in Warcraft's story. During Warcraft 3, Grand Marshal Othmar Garithos was a human who led the survivors of Lordaeron after the kingdom was destroyed by the Scourge during the Third War. Garithos was every bit as xenophobic as the humans we're seeing in Stromgarde today.
The lesser races must be purged from the kingdom. The only good non-human is a dead non-human. If you want something done right, leave it to a human. I hate working with these people. Never trust an elf!
He was the one who kept sending Kelthus and the Blood Elves on suicide missions, forcing them to eventually accept help from Lady Vash and the Naga rather than die, after which he accused them of treason and had them imprisoned. Garithos hated non-humans. In the 2012 round of Ask C-Dev, we were told Garithos believed in the preservation of humanity above all else, and that the Alliance should never have accepted other races in the first place. Garithos eventually formed an unlikely alliance with Sylvanas and the Undead, but only in order to regain control over the ruins of Lordaeron. He was still openly disgusted by them, and once he believed Lordaeron was his, arrogantly ordered the Undead to leave, which is when Sylvanas killed him. It's one of her finest moments.
There, your business is done. Now I want you wretched animals out of my city before I...
Kill him, too.
Gladly.
The capital city is ours, but we are no longer part of the Scourge. From here on out, we shall be known as the Forsaken.
Their dealings with Garithos had a lasting impact on the Blood Elves.
The human you served trusts no race but his own. His sense of honor runs no deeper than his tolerance.
It is loyalty and duty that bind me to him, and to this failing alliance. But now those tenets seem as distant as our ruined homeland.
In the past, even when Lothar might have considered rejoining the Alliance, he was deterred when they reminded him too readily of the bigotry that the elves had felt from the Alliance from the past.
When will they learn? When will they see that the Horde exists because of the Alliance? Because of their prejudice and their bigotry?
In other words, no, cartoonish villains spouting off about human supremacy in World of Warcraft is not some new addition. It's always been there, especially from weakened humans during times of distress. Garithos may have represented Lordaeron, one of the more merciful and tolerant cities, but Lordaeron had been destroyed, leaving behind the perfect conditions for xenophobia to thrive.
Humanity is in peril. These inhuman dogs must be slain.
Marin, true heir of the Trollbanes, will deliver us from the Horde. She will be Stromgarde's salvation.
If seeing these well-established subjects being addressed again now feels like a reference to real-life politics, then maybe the fault lies with politics that have gotten so ridiculous they're being recognized in genuinely the most classic of cartoonish villains. At the end of the Legacy of Arathor's story, Danath Trollbane stops Faerin from executing Marin, a reminder of Lordaeron once stopping Stromgarde from doing the same. Again, we can see how Danath has come to represent the version of the Alliance that is more tolerant and merciful. But I don't think the parallels stop there. Danath's decision is very clearly one that is great for the story and terrible for Stromgarde. Marin isn't about to become some non-threat just because she's been exiled. A lot of humans from the Alliance will agree with her. And while she couldn't get Faerin to take her side, it's hard to believe she'll have so much trouble with the Arathi Empire, who Faerin has already warned us are not so open-minded. To be honest, I'm not sure how kindly the mainland would take to the variety of people you keep company with. We in Hammerfall know beggars can't be choosers. We need all the help we can get. And you all have proven to be fine folk, but the Empire is not so open-minded or so desperate. In other words, Danath may come to regret showing Marin mercy, and others may come to resent him for it in the same way that Stromgarde resented the Alliance for showing the Orcs mercy. And, talking about the Orcs, they've just had their own little interesting lesson in mercy. One question that's being asked about the Legacy of Arathor questline is, why would the Orcs of Hammerfall show the humans mercy? It's one thing to avoid direct conflict with them, but why go out of their way to rescue human refugees and bring them back home? And it's a fair question. It's one asked by the Orcs themselves. When we visit Hammerfall, we find them grumbling about exactly this, as well as bristling at what they perceive as human arrogance.
Is there spiced bread in there? Orcish food is hard on my teeth.
If our food's so tough, human, then don't eat it. Not so long ago, these humans wanted to kill us. Why is Eitrig helping them? Better to leave them to their fate.
It's clear that the decision to help the humans is not the result of some sudden mass altruistic feeling on behalf of the Orcs. They're just rather grudgingly following Eitrig's orders. Faerin asks him about this directly.
If Orcs have long warred against the humans, why help them?
Long ago, a human showed me great kindness. I strive to honor his memory by protecting the weak and defenseless.
Eitrig is referring to the Paladin of the Silver Hand, Tyrion Fordring. Long ago, after the Second War, Eitrig became disillusioned with the Horde after learning about Gul'dan's demonic influence from Garona. He also managed to evade capture, which would have placed him in an internment camp, and lived as a hermit in an old abandoned tower. When Tyrion Fordring came across him, the two immediately began to fight, but this caused the tower to collapse. Tyrion was knocked unconscious and would have been killed if it wasn't for Eitrig, whose honor compelled him to save Tyrion's life. Afterwards, the two became friends, and when Eitrig was discovered and captured by Tyrion's fellow paladins, Tyrion stood against them to save Eitrig's life. For this, Tyrion was expelled from the Silver Hand, charged with treason, and exiled. Because, for all the Silver Hand's positive qualities, tolerance and mercy weren't among them, any more than they were promoted by the Sons of Lothar. But Eitrig showing mercy towards these humans, avoiding conflict where he can, and helping even his enemies when they're in need because of his honor, this is all typical of Eitrig. There's nothing new or surprising from him there. What is interesting though is the way that this particular show of mercy ends up backfiring on the Orcs. The refugees that they save are Syndicate spies in disguise, who reward the Orcs' mercy by setting fire to Hammerfall. When this happens, Eitrig blames himself, specifically his own readiness to show mercy in the first place. I was such a fool. I should not have sent away those Outriders. Without them, the Syndicate have overrun Hammerfall, and were it not for my full heart, the refugees turned out to be Syndicate spies. Curse their greasy hides. And sure, Eitrig continues to work with the not-human supremacist Alliance humans after this, but he still learned a valuable lesson in being too quick to be trusting and show mercy. As for the Orcs who only grumbled at following Eitrig's orders before, now that they've seen it result in their home being attacked, you have to wonder if they'd follow similar orders again, or if in the future they'd refuse to. On the surface, the ending of Legacy of Arathor is a return to peace. Maybe there was a bit of a kerfuffle in the Highlands, but all's well that ends well. But that's the wrong lesson to take. We know where we're going next in the story. We're heading to Koresh to deal with the Ethereals, Dimensius, Xalatath, all sorts of exciting stuff that has nothing to do with growing tensions between Orcs versus humans. But we've also just seen what happens when you assume everything's peachy at home now and go off to fight in some sort of distant, glorious war without properly addressing the underlying problems causing the unrest at home in the first place. So while I'm not saying the Legacy of Arathor has erupted into the Fifth War or anything like that, the seeds of a new conflict have been sown. Exiling Marin isn't going to just make the sentiments she's represented go away. It's probably not even going to make her go away. I have no doubt for even a moment that we'll see her again. And while the Orcs may have been slightly uncomfortably giving peace a chance, they've also just learned that mercy doesn't always result in the sort of love and harmony that idealistic platitudes would have you believe. Arathor came into being because of war with the trolls. It was born of conflict, and I believe this story is telling us its legacy will be one of conflict as well. Which brings me to the closing speech from the storyline.
I'm sorry. Stromgarde was not what you expected.
You were right. I was naive.
No, Faerin. I was wrong.
Wrong? How?
I said Thoradin's wall was just a wall. But what it represents does exist. In you.
I don't see...
You have been a guiding light. Saving my life. Bringing us together. Reminding me of my true mission. You look to the past, but you are our future. And I am glad of that.
Perhaps... Perhaps the new dawn is not what Marin wanted. But us, returning here for our people.
I hope you are right.
In the same way that Anduin Wrynn himself used to be, Faerin Lothar is bright-eyed and full of hope, so much so she seems to inspire similar hope in others. But maybe because I am so naturally cynical, all I can see is lingering doubt in Danath's final line. I don't think the future is about to be as bright as Faerin hopes, not even if we defeat the Void. What I personally find so interesting about Faerin is that while no one could claim she hasn't faced hardship, she's also extremely sheltered. Faerin fled her home to be a stowaway on the Arathi expedition to Hammerfall, a naive risk taken by an adventurous child. She lost both her arm and her eye in the storm that followed, but she also helped preserve the sacred flame, which means even this disaster only reinforced her faith. In Hammerfall, Faerin has faced a lot: Nerubians, the darkness, the death of loved ones, but her faith in the light has remained steadfast. She also grew up the only Arathi her age. While we know she's had friends, everyone else would have been either much older than her or much younger. The orphanage was built for her, and for many years she was its only orphan. And, of course, until very recently, she spent most of her life in Hammerfall. All of this can't help but have an isolating effect on her, which can't help but contribute to a certain lack of worldly wisdom. One of Faerin's lines that struck me the most while we quested with her in Hammerfall was her description of Elric, the Arathi leader of the Order of Night. Elric was one of us, a lamplighter. For years he worked to keep the Dawn Towers lit and the people of Hammerfall safe. We all trusted him. He fought with us. We had saved people from the darkness together. Then he betrayed the Arathi and everything the Lamplighters stand for. He ambushed my friend Andari and leads the Order of Night, who caused the breach here and all these deaths. I'm still not sure. Was he ever good? Did he plan that from the start? I don't know anyone more terrible. No one even comes close. She doesn't know anyone more terrible. And yes, Elric's actions were terrible, but it still just shows how inexperienced Faerin is, that she's only ever encountered one person who she considers to be this evil, and that she can't even begin to understand why he turned from the light. It's just beyond her comprehension. By the end of Legacy of Arathor, Faerin herself is admitting she's been naive, and that's just because she stepped outside for the first time. And while, because of her faith in the light and her experience that did help her face the challenge of feeling like her own mistakes might have made her unworthy, she was able to help Anduin through his own crisis of faith. What happens if Faerin ever has to question her faith in the light? Not because of her own worthiness, but because of the light. What happens if Faerin sees her own people start to commit the sort of atrocities that once drove the Maggar from Draenor? What if she sees the light itself commanding this? What if Faerin came to understand why Elric did what he did? Because we know a reckoning with the light is coming. Maybe not yet, but it's not something that can be ignored forever. Of course, this is assuming the story goes that way, which brings me to my conclusion. I asked if World of Warcraft has lost its edge, and my answer relies a little bit on what you mean by that. Themes of peace and, yes, mercy and tolerance have always been central to Warcraft's story. So much of Warcraft's history is about the opposing factions learning how to put aside their differences to fight for the greater good. In fact, that's where some of the best story comes from. Look at Warcraft 3, or Mists of Pandaria, or Legion. But that said, you need that conflict to exist in the world if you want those stories to be powerful. Eitrigg and Tyrion's friendship matters because both of them had reason and opportunity to kill each other, and they chose peace instead. At the same time, themes of knowing when you cannot simply be tolerant of an enemy, when you're willing to do or sacrifice anything to defeat them because they cannot be allowed to win, have also always been central to Warcraft. I think that is what is so off-putting about Danath's tolerance and mercy line. The Sons of Lothar were driven by protecting Azeroth and other worlds from a version of the Horde that posed a threat so great it was worth sacrificing everything for. That doesn't necessarily conflict with showing tolerance and mercy towards the Hammerfall orcs. Confusing Mag'har refugees who pose no great threat at all with fell orcs and bloodlust-driven orc invaders cheapens both the sacrifices that the Sons of Lothar made and the reasons for that sacrifice. But that should have been the point that Danath made. Not that the Sons of Lothar always promoted tolerance, but that it cheapens his own legacy when these humans make out like the Orcs of Hammerfall are anything like the threat he gave up so much for. And I admit, I would quite like my fantasy characters to go back to talking a little bit less like they've all been in therapy lately. While we're on the subject, I'd also like to see them go back to strong, iconic leaders. I am very sorry, councils are lovely in theory, but they've proven incredibly boring in practice. But I also want any conflict that we deal with to make sense. Edge just for an edgelord's sake leads to storytelling like Sylvanas burning Teldrassil, mostly just because it made for a very striking image you could sell an expansion on. I shudder at the thought of a return to that. For that reason, I am excited by Legacy of Arathal's story, because I don't think it's claiming that everyone's fine in a peace that will last. I'm excited by the seeds the story has planted for future conflicts that will be even worse, and enemies that you cannot turn into friends by just being tolerant and merciful at them. It makes me hopeful that Faerin's admittedly charming naivety can only last for so long now that she's out in the real world. Well, fantasy world, but you know what I mean. Where the humans just reminded us of old hatreds that doesn't put them quite in the shining innocent light we've grown accustomed to being associated with the Alliance, and the orcs were just reminded that the cost of mercy can sometimes be unacceptably high. But I think I've been going on long enough. If you enjoyed this video, you can always like, subscribe, comment, share, sign up for notifications so you never miss another video, all the good YouTube stuff. You can also join me in thanking my Patreons who are helping to keep the channel alive. Finally, you can occasionally find me on Twitch, where I'm always happy to talk about all things lore. So while that's all for now, hopefully I'll see you again soon.